The current financial system is going to collapse. Today, the US dollar that was worth $1 100 years ago is now worth 3 cents. The Canadian dollar is no better. This is because they are fiat currencies, worthless pieces of paper backed by nothing that have value only because the current system says they do. But fiat currencies always collapse in time. It has happened throughout history, and soon it's going to happen again. The globalists want to replace fiat currencies with CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Not because it will solve our problems, but because CBDCs linked to digital IDs will give them complete control over what you can buy, where you can go, and what you can own. To paraphrase the World Economic Forum, you will own nothing, and they will be happy. But you can protect yourself, simply by doing what the rich and powerful are doing. In this, part 2 of my 2-part series, with Adrian Spitters, personal financial consultant, and Peter J. Merrick, tax haven specialist, we discuss the fact that while the globalists want CBDCs, even they are not certain they will get their way. And so, they are preparing for any eventuality. What are they doing? The answer lies in the title of Adrian and Peter's new book. It starts with gold. Adrian, Peter, welcome back for part 2 of this very important interview series on the financial system and CBDCs, which is what we'll be discussing today. In your book, It Starts with Gold, as we discussed in the last interview, you talk about cryptocurrencies as being almost a psyop, a setup for CBDCs. Please explain what you mean by that.
Well, like many of us, we've seen people make lots of money off of cryptocurrency, and it was touted as being an off-ramp from the financial industrial complex, which was the central bank fake digital currency. And it was supposed to be a medium of exchange. And what's happened is it's been co-opted. And Adrian will talk about that. And more importantly, it's being used as a store of wealth, but it's not real. At any point, just like we saw with the truckers, a flick can happen. And we'll talk about what it's built on, the algorithm and the security encryption and all that stuff. Everything says to me, I smell a rat. And if I wanted to get everyone locked down on a central bank digital currency, I would want to give them some freedom, similar to the internet. Do you remember those days when the internet was free and you could watch and do and find and talk and say whatever you want? They allowed you to have free reign. And then we all know, especially with the experiences that we've all had being deplatformed, getting X's, all these things, that once they got us all on, they changed the rules and they put us in a straitjacket, and we're living in fear. But we did it ourselves. And that's what's happening. Problem, reaction, solution. People felt that there was a problem with the financial system, with the unlimited amount of printing of money. The reaction was, here's this crypto, and the solution is going to be when cryptos crash and trillions of dollars disappear. We have central bank digital currency. We already have it prepared for you. And we'll talk about the negatives. Adrian?
Well, it is a Trojan horse, because what they're wanting to do is, when the system starts to collapse, they need to control your spending. They need to control the flow of money, and control behavior. So the CBDCs, for example, are that control mechanism. we are already under a system that's very, very close to a CBDC. If you look at, MasterCard, Visa, all the credit cards, it's already there. The only thing that's not really there yet is the connection to your ID, your health status, your digital status. Once all that is in place, then they're going to have total control, and then they can control the flow of money. One of the things is when the idea is if the economy is slowing down and they want you to spend money to reinvigorate the economy, they can put limits on your money. They can tell you, well, you have access, you have more money. It's just you don't have access to it other than a certain amount, but you need to spend it by a certain day before you lose access to it. And then there's a time frame. So they can force you to spend money rather than save it. So it's really controlling your behavior is what they're aiming to do, because they want to control all flows of money.
One thing just to reiterate on what Adrian said, and just bring back, we're not going to do it. We're not going to go on to central bank digital currency because we're not used to it. People are concerned. Our generation is concerned about privacy. So let's go and come up with something that's really sexy. And if I were the devil, problem, reaction, solution, I would have this cryptocurrency come. I'd let some people who really were their kids in their basement get into it early and let them make a ton of money, because we all know with Epstein, all they have to do is just put zeros and ones, like it's a flick of a switch, right? Hitting a keyboard and the guy's a billionaire, right? We allow that happen. What then happens is people get more comfortable. The people are starting to talk about it. They want to try with it, and they put their money in it. And all they have to do at that point is flip the switch. And we deal with that in our book. It starts with gold. The encryption happens to be the NSA. The systems that are being used happen to be created by the NSA. And there's quantum computers that can slice right through the encryption. They know that you and I are talking. They know if I say something. I've been in the room, and I'm sure many of your viewers have, that I've talked about, underwear, and I don't even have my phone on, and Adrian's phone's there, and I go home and I end up seeing, Fruit of the Loom advertisements show. This is not as free as people think, because you're using a system that you do not own, that basically with triangulation and the computers they have available, at any point they flip the switch and they show up and they say, we have a solution. And they always intended to have that solution, but they needed all of us to get comfortable. Let's go on Facebook. Let's give all our personal information. We can do whatever we want. And then once they have all our stuff, but when that happens to be a super gigantic company, they'll censor us.
Yes. Now, the problem is, and I know that some of my viewers are huge into CBDCs, and if you're making money on it, good for you. I myself have never gotten into them. And the reason I haven't is everything we discussed in the last interview about the current financial system and how it's all a house of cards. It's not backed by anything. Well, cryptocurrency is exactly the same thing. It has no actual backing to it. It has no value. So the question I would have for you, gentlemen, is, because the cryptocurrency system wasn't created by these globalists, it was created by other people, programmers sitting at their desk and creating this system. How are they going to destroy it? How are they going to shut it down?
Okay, Adrian and I wrote an article, and it's something that we touch upon in our book. And Adrian, can you tell them about some of the theories about crypto, specifically Bitcoin? Because this is something that most people don't know, because it was a bait and switch. Yeah. Basically what happens is the central bankers, from our understanding, or whoever's in charge, saw that this could be a problem. So instead of completely making it illegal and everything, because nothing's allowed to happen in society unless it's ordained, because they can shut each and every one of us off and deplatform us and do other things to us. Adrian, can you share what we discovered and we talk about in the book, but we really drill upon it in our next book, last asset standing, but we do talk about it, and it starts with gold. Can you share with what we're addressing right now, what we just addressed? Because I think this is key.
In our book, we alluded to there was a bait and switch going on where people were encouraged to buy cryptocurrencies. They've been basically feeding certain influencers, giving them early amounts of Bitcoin and other cryptos, and then start promoting it. So there was already a path of trying to promote Bitcoin as a decentralized means of getting out of the system. Recently, I've come across some articles where there was an actual bait and switch going on, where the original Bitcoin, which starts with the code 1, has been switched to what the BTC is, which I think starts with a code 3. So the original Bitcoin that was in the paper by I can't even pronounce his name. So
a sushi roll.
Sushi roll is which a number of people think it's a group of people controlled by the CIA. So even the control of that may be fictional. We don't know for sure because nobody's ever really identified who this person is. But the original Bitcoin is still trading around $40, and the Bitcoin that we are looking at that's close to $100,000 is an alternative coin that is being promoted. And at some point, they're going to flip the switch and saying, there's too much criminal activity going on. It's unsafe. For your safety, we have something that's better. And this is the bait and switch into the CBDCs.
Right.
And the mass population is going to go for it because they don't understand what's coming down the pipe. The government's going to take care of you.
And can I just share with you the vantage point that Adrian and I have seen? Is we saw during the dot-coms, everybody was saying it's different now. And it's like, it was, someone had like a plan on a napkin and they were able to raise like billions of dollars. There was one company in Canada that had an IPO of $2 billion. And I got to share with you what it said on the IPO. It came out in 1999. And what it was the biggest IPO in Canadian history. And it said that they lost $9 million. They had no prospects of making $9 million, but their biggest contract was with a company called Nortel.
Right.
So everybody always says it's different. The thing is, if it's not touchable, it's not. And most people, and Adrian, have I seen this? We saw Enron, we saw Nortel, we saw this, we saw Briex. We've seen it again and again and again, where people say it's different. It's not different.
Never different.
The only other book that I would tell everybody to read other than our book, It Starts With Gold, is Popular Delusions, Madness of Crowds. It was written in 1837 by Charles McMackey. And what he does is he looks at craziness that happens. And his first thing he talks about is tulip mania, that people were spending the equivalent of a country's ransom on a tulip bulb. Could you imagine that? And every generation thinks it's different. It's not. And the only thing that Adrian and I have is perspective, because we've seen it before. And anytime there's something that's not real, that's not actually producing something, it's just an idea, and people go and give their power over to it. And we saw something in Canada that the rest of the world did not see. If what Adrian is actually saying is true, and I believe it is, they switched it out, and because no one knew the difference between the original coding for Bitcoin and this thing that all these exchanges are, transacting. If what happened in Canada, where they just decide that flip the switch, right now in Bitcoin and the other currencies, there's $3 trillion. That money vanishes overnight. It's almost exactly the same, which we talked in the last interview, Will, that for each piece of silver, there is over 400 pieces of paper for that 1 ounce of silver. So when the system collapses, all they have to do is flip the switch, because it's all electric ones and zeros or whatever it's being quantum. It's gone. And what's going to happen? The people who are asleep, they're going to do what they always do. They're going to run to the government. And the government's going to come out and say, oh, we're your saviors.
Yes.
We have the ultimate enslavement tool, but they're not going to present it that way. But again, we know as a Canadian, everything that was temporary, every single thing going back to the Income Tax Act is not temporary. It gets worse.
Yeah.
We let them get away with it. It always gets worse unless sovereign individuals basically make preparation to have control of their own lives. Sorry, I'm very emotional about this.
No, it's correct.
Let me just interject one quick thing about Bitcoin. When Bitcoin was first brought out, it was a means of exchange between currencies. Like you can exchange between people and buy things, but over time the coding has changed, and that's probably happened when the switch happened. It's no longer a convenient means of exchange. It is now becoming a store of value and promoted as a store of value. It's getting more expensive and difficult to exchange your Bitcoins. So that's a sign that the original intention and where it is today are two different things.
Right. Now, the book that you were referring to, Peter, was one of my favorite books, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, as you said, written in the 1800s by Charles, I think his last name is actually McKay.
McKay or Mackey, something. It could be. It's one of them. You're right.
Yeah, something like that. But he has, the reason I've read the book through twice now, because it's a wonderful book, very revealing of human nature. And there's a fantastic quote in the book that I memorized, because if you want to paint a picture of human nature, here it is. He said, it will be seen that, remember, he was written in the 1840s, so he said men, but insert people. It will be seen that men go mad in crowds, but they only come to their senses slowly and one at a time. And boy, have we ever seen that in the last 5 years.
Yep.
Now, so we've got this PSYOP really with cryptocurrency, getting people set up to accept a digital currency. But now they actually have to implement it. And they're trying to. We've already had the EU come out recently and say that within 6 months, they're going to have a CBDC system in place. But when I interviewed Brett Oland, the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union, he's a banker, he understands the banking system. And he's been saying this for several years now, that he doesn't think they actually have the technology to make it work because of something called the rails system,
Correct.
Which is where the banks have to transfer money back and forth in between them. And Brett actually tried this with the credit unions and they spent, I can't remember, it was some massive amount of money, $20 million, and several years trying to create an efficient rail system between all the credit unions, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't make it work. So he doesn't think that they can actually make this work because they don't have the technology to create this rail system that will move these CBDCs around between all the banks. Now, we have discussed this in one of our past financial updates, that one of the plans of the globalists is to get rid of the commercial banks. They want to sweep them out of the way, but they haven't done that yet. So I want your opinion on Brett's opinion. Do they even have the technology to make this work?
They do.
My understanding is, go ahead.
Well, I just want to share something that back in 1971, and when they created something called the Depository Trust Corporation, no one thought that they would be able to trade stocks the way that they trade, where they would dematerialize it. Well, right now, it just happens to be very convenient that the depository trust and all these depository trusts, like similar companies around the world, and this is where home ownership, stock ownership, bond ownership, they are right now testing a platform they're rolling it out for cryptocurrencies. And basically this will all go up to the Bank of International Settlements, the guys who are backing those $4 quadrillion of exchange traded funds. And in essence, they have it in place. We don't know what the technology. I've been watching, Will, about these quantum computer chips. There was one called Willow, and it did a calculation 15 septillion times faster than any other quantum computer that existed in the planet. And just for your audience, because I had to look at what a septillion was. A septillion is a trillion. Like, I don't even know what $1 trillion is, but now they got a trillion. And this thing was 15 septillion times faster, something that would have taken, I don't know, 128 billion years to calculate. It did within 5 minutes. So the technology that we're allowed to see and the technology that exists are two different things. But the one thing I will share is the most incredible invention ever. And I don't know if you want to say that we are, God created us. They're scared of us taking back our sovereignty, because what they're looking for people to do is to outsource their brains, their sovereignty, their self-dignity, everything. And right now, everybody, when they throw things out that this time's different, and they find, there was a book I read years ago. It says, if you meet a Buddha on the road, kill it. Don't give your power away. Like, everyone, think about it. People are going into crypto. I'm going to make quick money. You want to know something? If your soul matters, do something that adds to the world, not something that is just the zeros and ones. And that's what Adrian and I have discovered, because we've been in the business long enough to see that .coms and were different. And it wasn't. And it goes back to when we were talking about our favorite book. If anybody wants, before they invest, they have to read Popular Delusions, Madness of Crowds, because it's never different. But I got to tell you, at the same time, what's never different, the disaster that happens after. But the difference now is they've got a control grid. If they can get us on to it, they can get us on central bank digital currency, you will own nothing, as Klaus Schwab says, and they will be happy.
Yes.
Because they will own everything. And when they tokenize everything, they're even going to own your DNA and your children and your grandchildren, and you will not have the freedom. And the sad thing is, future generations, if there are any, won't know what it's like to be human
and free. Yes. Adrian?
One of the reasons my thought is why the rail system is not working is, maybe, like you alluded to, is that they're going to eliminate the banks and credit unions, and they're not meant to have an ability to exchange. And George Gammon did a video last year about how what he saw coming is that eventually the banks will disappear and everything will be done initially through each country's central bank itself, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to remember, the too big to fail banks are owned by the very entities that are shareholders of the banks, and they are also shareholders of the BIS. The ultimate goal is that all transactions, which are on ledgers through the DTC system that William Dentzer initially created, and it's in the book, the full explanation. But the whole thing is going to be that it goes from the banks, they call collapse. It doesn't matter that, the banks collapse. JP Morgan is a shareholder of the Federal Reserve. So now they're controlling it, but they're also in control of the BIS. So now those too big to fail banks are all colluded now under the BIS, and now they control all transactions. So I think the plan is it's going to be dissolving all banks, and all transactions go to one central transaction, one central platform. So you don't
Can I add something which we covered in the book? We broke it down to the Great Financial Confiscation 1.0 and the Great Financial Confiscation 2.0. And what 1.0 is when the banks started collapsing in the United States, because we can look towards history and we can, because when you see movies all the time, they have the same script, like it's the same movie, it's a remake. If it works, they don't change it. So all these banks collapsed. Basically, it was caused by the Federal Reserve to collapse, but they had certain banks that they kept, and they took over all the debt, and they consolidated power. This is exactly what would you call it? We called it Scotch and like old Scotch and new vats. Is that what we called it, Adrian?
Old
It's
Scotch
like
and
all
new
you
vats,
have.
yes.
All you have to do is look at. There's nothing new. It's just a history not studied, and we touch upon this in our book, because what happened in the 1930s is the banks closed, they seized gold, and they basically introduced a new monetary policy in the United States. And then the war broke out, and then you had Bretton Woods. And in essence, at that point, this system, they went off the gold standard, they produced all this paper. Every time they close on us, and one thing that I want to share with the readers during the research, and we put this in our book, already, before we have central bank digital currency, already 92% of all transactions that happen in the world are already digital. They already know, because you're using systems, and systems are being used that are owned by the same groups. And I'm not going to say people, because I think it happens to be a bunch of technocrats running it who show up. So what they're concerned of is those people using that 8%, because it's Margaret Mead said, a few people can change the world. That's the way it's always been. These are independent people. And that's why it's important right now, while you still have time, while I have time, while your audience has time, to get an off-ramp. And it's not going to be from one digital prison that we're all scared of, which is central bank digital currency, into another one. It's getting to real things.
Right.
People. Well, what's the last asset standing, Adrian? What did you define the next book?
I'll have to find the email, because we just created. One second here.
Tangible, physical, meaningful, and lasting. Those are the things. Tangible, physical.
Here it is. Last asset standing is about being tangible, physical, meaningful, and lasting. In a world where wealth is digitized, tracked, and increasingly controlled, this book points to what remains when the illusions fade. It is not about speculation. It is about paper. It is about paper wealth, digital tokens, or promises backed by political will. It is about what you can hold, what cannot be erased, and what endures. This is the blueprint for those who seek to present real value outside the system, beyond reach, built to last. Last Asset Standing is the sequel to It Starts with Gold. It continues the journey towards financial sovereignty, clarity, conviction, and a compass grounded in truth.
Right.
Well, we did that because I guess our whole point is get to something real and get to it quick, because that's a lifesaver. Because right now, we're about to hit the iceberg. And I don't have context. I do remember hearing stories when I was young. Can you believe those people keep their money and their gold and everything in their mattress? There's a reason for it. Because some of the wealthiest people on this planet were not in a Federal Reserve selected backed bank, and they lost everything. It's not like, oh, this is a bad bank. Like, we're talking, some of the wealthiest people had their money stripped from them. But their debts, those remain. And I'll give you a practical example. Someone stupid enough to go to an Ivy League university and take some woke program ends up having $300,000 debt on something that did not contribute to anything but division. And that's an opinion on my part. They go bankrupt. Guess what? They're bankrupt, but that debt they're not released from. This is exactly the old playbook. We identify that in it. It starts with gold. And this is, in essence, it's worse. It's 10 times, it's 1,000 times worse, because they dream Huxley dreamed about having this technology. He was a eugenicist. His brothers formed the UN. They dreamed about this. They write about this. This is their dream. Hitler would be. He wished he had stuff like this. He wished all he had was like those little cards, those little computer cards. And the scary thing is, people are lining up for their own prison.
Yes.
And they're choosing to be ignorant because it's too much to handle. We've been told by people who read our book, they liked our book, but it's too much for them. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter if you choose to put your head in the ground or you actually know what's happening. If you choose to do nothing, it's going to happen regardless. You choose to be ignorant or you choose to know but avoid doing something, it's still going to happen just as much as the sun goes down every night.
Right. So once again, gentlemen, I want to try to connect some dots. Something that you were talking about, Adrian, we were talking about the fact that, yes, they can shut down the commercial banks because they own them. And one thing that we touched on in a past quarterly financial update that you didn't mention there was that when the private central banks get these CBDCs, those central banks will then be connected directly to the treasuries. And that gives the government unlimited money to work with. Now, why is that important? And this comes down to my own personal theory. The globalists, a lot of people have this idea that the globalists are out to form a one world government and all national borders will disappear. I don't think that's what they're trying to do. This, once again, is the old playbook. We go back to this last interview when they created the Fractional Reserve Banking Act so they could control the governments. What they want to do is control the national governments and through those control the people with the CBDCs. And this is why the quantum computing is so important because we've got 8 billion people on this planet and the computing power isn't there to track and monitor every single human being and control their movements without quantum computing. So we add together quantum computing, central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, social credit scores, and treasuries that are connected directly to the central banks. And there's their ultimate control structure. So the next question is this. Let's assume that you're right. Brett Oland is wrong. They actually do have the technology to do this. We got the EU saying they're going to bring in CBDCs within 6 months. So assuming that it works, and I realize, gentlemen, this is an extremely difficult question. All you can do is take an educated guess at this, because I'm going to ask you to try to predict the future. And something else we discussed in our most recent quarterly financial update was that there's a three-way war going on between the BRICS nations, the US and the US dollar, Donald Trump, and the globalists who want to bring in CBDCs. They're all struggling for control. And this is why the banks, the private central banks, are buying up thousands of tons of gold because they don't know what's going to happen either. And they want to have those physical assets because they'll come out literally golden no matter what happens. But let's assume that this globalist plan to bring in CBDCs actually happens. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Your best guess, gentlemen.
I don't think it's going to happen by 2030. It's still going to take a lot longer because you bring up those three players. There's a battle. They're not all on the same page, and there's a war for control. So for it to happen as early as 2030, which is sort of the projection, they have to be on the same page. So I think we have some time. If they become unified or one of them gains total control, I think then the timeline speeds up.
Peter?
Well, if you want to know the end goal, they tell us. It's unbelievable. It's almost like the satanic. It's like, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to kill you. And you let me in your house and I kill you. It's like, they tell us in their papers, and the paper was 2030. They basically tell us that they're going to be in complete control. And our population, there's other papers, because that's only like every 15 years or a portion of the century. And they don't need us. This is a control to eliminate people. And what happens is if too many of us wake up, and we say no, it all ends. Every tyranny that's ever existed is when a few people said, I will not bend the knee. And I have to share with you something. I was here in the United States. I couldn't go back. I was planning to go back because I'm a Torontonian. Can you see? I'm a Torontonian. And the people who took the vaccine, I spoke to so many people saying, I'm going to lose my job. I have to pay my mortgage. They had them as slave debts. And they did it. And Adrian and I talked to a very nice woman. She didn't know her husband got 2 jabs because he wanted to make sure his family was protected. And he ended up having a heart attack and dying. People were forced. One of the things that I found when I started working with Adrian is the majority of the people who did not get vaxxed, they had already removed themselves from the system. Either they had enough wealth or they had their own businesses, so they had their own choice. And what they're trying to do right now and who they are, all I can do is point up to the Bank of International Settlements, because that's the closest I can come. And all these groups like Gavi, WHO, all that stuff that's located in Switzerland, which to me is more evil than they say the Vatican, and they point to Washington, D.C., and they point to Britain. You know, if I was a pickpocket, I want you to be focused there, right? This stuff is happening in Switzerland. You got a Bond villain who they chose, like they're putting it in our face. The only way is to get off the system, and it starts with gold. And I know, Will, that you help a number of your listeners, your watchers, with gold. And that I applaud, because most people don't even know how to get gold. When they go to their brokers or they have these conversations about, I'm worried about central bank digital currency. You know what the problem is? If I was a therapist and I have issues with my mother and I've never dealt with my issues with my mother, guess what? We ain't talking about your mother. If you go to a sleep person and you start having these conversations, which are genuine concerns, they don't want to deal with it because their jobs are tied to it. God forbid they would ask, because all of us know when we spoke out, I don't know about the listeners here, but Adrian and I, financially, socially, we became pariahs. And the reason we wrote It Starts With Gold, which we outline what's happened through history, and most people don't know this. And I don't know if you noticed this in the book, because we had people sharing ideas with us. I didn't know that close to 8 million people starved to death in the United States when the population was 122 million people during the Great Depression. We were never taught that. We were never taught that there were gulags in the United States. You know those make-work programs that they show building the Hoover Dam and everything? They were paying these people $30 a month, and they were taxing them and also charging them for room and board $25. And that was well below market, and they were putting them in the worst places. So if you want to know the future, you have to look at the past, and that's what we did. We looked at the Great Financial Confiscation 1.1, when the entire world changed. It completely changed. The world that existed prior to World War I and World War II completely changed, because Americans in the world were independent, self-sufficient. After those 2 wars, the world had been reset because the old world order was coming to an end. And they have been preparing for this. And they have to put the chains around our neck before the system collapses. And that is getting us on central bank digital currency, because they can control us. And Canadians, they tested it on us. They closed people's bank accounts. They don't care about the law, because when you don't have morality, you'll do whatever. And in essence, the threat is you being independent. And it starts with being educated and actually watching programs like Will's.
Now, just as a side note, folks, Peter just mentioned these globalist organizations like Gavi, the WHO, they're all in Switzerland. There's a reason they're in Switzerland. They have diplomatic immunity there. You can't send, say, the international police in to investigate their books. They're protected from that, and that's the reason why they're in Switzerland. But that's just a side note. So, Adrian, let's assume that your projection, time projection is correct. And I tend to think it is, because replacing the current system, it's far more complex than I think people realize. One of the examples of this I use is that we've got a lot of people now who are sort of joining local farming collectives and whatever, or they're getting into barter systems, and that's a good thing. But that's not going to protect you if they bring in CBDCs, because how are you going to collect your paycheck, pay your mortgage, put gas in your car? That's all going to be built in a CBD system. You can't survive on a barter system in a society that's run entirely by digital money and digital IDs. But to bring it in, they have to do this gradually. You know, for example, they got to get all the companies on board with paying their employees with CBDCs. So when we look at that very complex system, and in the previous interview, and in this one, you've referred to this hierarchy of assets. But now I think we need to look at the hierarchy of implementing the CBDC system. And how do you see that playing out?
Well, that brings us into tokenization, because right now CBDCs can control your stocks, bonds, cash, etc., which are all transacted on ledgers primarily. You don't physically own those assets. But the next step is, and it's already in the works, is the tokenization of all real estate, all assets, to put that on a ledger. So you no longer physically own your real estate. You don't physically own any asset, your car. That is all going to be tokenized. So now, and I'm started, going into more depth. And I did write one article on it, but everything is sort of set up in a how do you call it, through tokenization. There's a certain a way of transaction have to happen, and if a transaction is slightly missed or there's a glitch in it, that transaction disappears. There's no way to trace it, no way to find back. So there's danger in it. But the tokenization means that it's totally on a ledger. And there's even now talk in my last article about that they're going to tokenize even gold, and it's going to be illegal to own gold. They're going to criminalize it, just like they did in the 30s. So unless you have your precious metal stored at your home, now how do you use it to exchange? That's going to be a problem. Or you have it stored and vaulted in another jurisdiction that's not as far along as, let's say, we are in the tokenization process. And I think that's going to be a couple of years before that happens, but the process is now in place. So now you're going to start looking at is how do you hold your assets? Where do you hold your assets to protect yourself? And then the question becomes, how do we get access to it and build a community so that we can spend that money, how we can work outside the system? Because they're going to basically try to control every single asset, including your DNA.
Peter, your thoughts?
Well, I'm like you. I woke up in 2020 when my rights were being impinged upon, the fact that I was treated like a leopard, and I went down the rabbit hole, people would say, but I wasn't going to people like you. I was listening to people like you. I went to the white papers, and that's what we did for It Starts With Gold. We went to the UN. We went to all these different organizations, these globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum. And they tell us what's planned. Basic income. They were testing this in the United States. They basically, the average American was earning like $45. They gave them $1,400. They destroyed the economy because people who are independent are a problem. They went into people's bank accounts and they deposited money. Well, they easily can go into your bank account and take your money away. They can go in, if it's digital, I got a coin. I own a coin. It's worth over $3,000. I wish I'd have one right now, but we're imagining I have a coin. I have a coin. I go to sleep, I still have that coin. If I want to go and buy something with it, I have a choice. But as soon as it's put on a ledger, they can put a timestamp on it. They can take it away. They can go and have it attached to a camera, and they can take it away. Now, one of the things that I want everybody here to understand about central bank digital currency, if you want to know where we're going and where we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, look at China. China has been the testing ground for globalists. There's no government. It's all, what would you call, bread and circuses, which was a term that came out during the decline and the destruction of the Roman Empire. For us, Trudeau, Carney, Poilievre, Trump, all these guys, they've been selected. And if the population basically pushes back too much, they have another puppet. But no one gets there. Because we all know, those of us who tried to speak out, they shut us down. And at that point, we're starting to make our own networks because we're using their system. That's the whole point. You need to use your system, and that's your community. That means getting tangibles, because we have so many examples where they took our money during the truckers, they deposited money, they didn't need your information. The only way that you're going to get off is to basically have real tangibles and to stay on to the old system. I'll give you an example. You buy a car after 1998, they're tracking you. You buy a new car right now, if you're kissing your lover, I'm going to give you an example, they can post that up because they're watching you in your own car.
All right. So a personal theory that I have, gentlemen, I want your opinion on this, because we are talking about how they're going to shut down everybody's assets. And the most vulnerable, of course, is cash, which people have in the bank. Now, they've been making a big deal in the recent years, especially through mainstream media, about cyber attacks and trying to convince people that everything is really vulnerable to these cyber attacks. Now, a little known fact, folks, and let's make a parallel here. The vast majority of computer viruses are actually created by antivirus companies in order to create a market for their product. So what you're not hearing about in these cyber attacks is that, for the most part, no, it's not some Chinese hacker or some kid in a basement in America. It's the globalists themselves. They're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I think they're priming the pump for. Because this is the way a cyber attack often works. They break into a system, they steal data, and then what they do is they shut the system down. Because if they do that, very often what happens is any record of what happened in the last few seconds before it was shut down. And by the way, when they set these attacks up, it does happen in seconds. The program goes in, breaks through the back wall, and the back door, and it steals data, and then it shuts the system down. And when it shuts the system down, when it loses power, it loses records of everything that happened in the last few seconds. So there's no way to track who did it. So here's what I think could happen. There's a massive power outage. All the banks go down, and everything is digital in the banks. It's all in computers. And when the computers come back up, your accounts are all empty. And there's no record of what happened to it. And showing up at the bank with your most recent bank statement doesn't help you, because they can just say, well, maybe you emptied it shortly before this happened. You have no proof that that money was actually yours. At which point in time, they swoop in with their solution. Oh, well, we'll just give you all the universal basic income and put you on CBDCs. What do you think of that?
Well, early on in the pandemic, there was a paper being floated around, or a list of things that are going to happen. And one of them would be to everybody's going to be on universal basic income. And a lot of people poo-pooed that, saying, well, you know, I've got money, I've got assets, I'm not going to get on the basic income. But if you're bankrupt or poor, one of the plans was that the government would sweep in with the universal basic income, and you can go on it, and you would have to, and we'll wipe out your debt by signing over the remaining assets, and you will have a guaranteed income from life, but now you're beholden to the government. So maybe that is part of the plan that we sort of forgot about early on in the pandemic.
Can I share something? Because again, in our book, it starts with gold. We address this because we broke down what's going to happen as the Great Confiscation 2.0. And we looked at the Great Confiscation 1.0. And if we look at what happened during the 30s, people who were fiercely independent had money that put everything into the system. Their banks went bankrupt. The system was made that they lent out the money. There was no money in these banks, and they went bankrupt, and their debts were taken over by banks and the Federal Reserve. Now it's exactly what Adrian's saying, and it's exactly what we were saying. Old Scotch and new vats. It's just gotten more complicated. But if you read the book that we were talking about, Will, earlier, about Popular Delusions, Madness of Crowds, people think it's always different. But if it works in the past, human beings basically don't change. And the problem with humanity is in every generation, you got new people learning things and most of them don't learn what worked in the past or what was done in the past.
Going back to the collapse of the banks in the 30s, if you had your money in one of the banks that were not chosen to survive when they reopened the banks, so they had bank holiday, and you were a super wealthy family and you had money in the banks, you had no debt, or you maybe had some debt, but you had plenty of wealth to offset the debt. When those banks went under, your assets disappeared with those banks, and suddenly you were now bankrupt. You were a pillar in the community, a wealthy family. You were in poverty along with everybody else because you didn't have your money with JP Morgan. You had your money with a bank that collapsed. So your assets became, at that time, was confiscated.
Yes.
So that playbook will happen again because nothing changes.
Can I take it another level? Something you brought up earlier. The government in 2008 did bailouts, and that's where they took our money. And there was a layer. They took our money to pay off these people who are making bets and doing all these things which were planned. And we talk about that. We show how it was done for those of you who want to have point by point how they made it that they were able to steal trillions of dollars in 2008. What they're doing now is they're getting us ready that they will pull the rug out from everybody because you own nothing. And we will be begging for a solution. And at that point, if they get the central bank digital currency going, we are in trouble. And I really impress upon people, become knowledgeable. Everything that's happened before is happening now, and what is being planned to happen is happened before, but not as bad, because now they have digital chains. They are able to go and take your money, but they will leave you with the debt. And as Adrian shared, back in let's say someone had, $1 million loan, the equivalent, but they had $10 million in the bank. Their 10 millions disappeared, but they were stuck with the $1 million loan. And they were stuck with it. And that didn't disappear. Well, what's going to happen is when you're starving, and you need food, and you might have been self-sufficient, and you didn't make proper arrangements for yourself, they're going to come to you when you're desperate. And we saw a test of this during COVID. People who wanted to go and keep their bodily sovereignty to themselves, they were told that they were going to be let go and fired. And many people, because people depended on them, they had to bend the knee. For you not to bend the knee and not to succumb to digital currency of any kind. Because I want to share with most people, all cryptocurrency is built on SHA 256, which is the NSA. All banks and financial institutions are regulated by the same people. We identified in the book that the Depository Trust Corporation, which dematerialized all assets in the world, has direct ties to the CIA. It was created by William Casey. For those of you who do not know who William Casey was, at the time, he was the head of the Securities Exchange Commission in the United States in 1971, when William Desert, who was also CIA, was appointed to start the Depository Trust Corporation. William Casey was Iran-Contra. He was using the money system to do things that did not benefit human beings and broke the law. And you know what the consequences were for the law being broken? We know the consequences. You either remove yourself or you're going to succumb to the plan. Problem, reaction, solution. You have people cry when their money disappears, begging the government or some great force to take over, and they have the solution. Because as we have pointed out in our book, $4 quadrillion worth of unfunded, unbacked derivatives, and it's all based on faith. And as soon as something collapses like that, everything that you think you own, everything that you thought you knew, if you haven't done your education, if you had not done a plan, you might not survive it, because there were people during the Great Depression who did not survive, millions.
Right. Now, the reason why I came up with that theory of one way in which they might shut down the commercial banks was not focused on us, the consumers, the people. It was focused on, because we know the globalists, they want to get rid of the commercial banks. They don't want those in the way. That's just a barrier to their control. And as you pointed out, Adrian, yeah, they own the commercial banks. They could shut them down, but they need an excuse that people will buy. And so this is where I came up with this one possible scenario. There's this massive cyber attack that wipes out everything. And at the same time that it wipes out your bank account, folks, and all of your cash is suddenly gone with no way to prove that you ever owned it, well, it wipes out the commercial bank too.
Yep.
They don't own anything anymore.
Yep.
So
now we have a crisis.
Says, yeah, well, we don't need them anymore. Which is solved.
Yep.
So now I want to draw a parallel from that. Coming back to what you were talking about, Adrian, with tokenization. So, okay, they tokenize everything. Now, let's use the proper technical terms, at which point in time you don't actually own the asset, but you still control it. You know, it's still your house to live in, it's still your car to drive. But now they do the same thing. Massive cyber attack that takes down the blockchain system, wipes out all that tokenization. And when it comes back up, you literally own, control nothing.
That's exactly what I've been identified when I was saying about the tokenization. If the transaction doesn't match, it disappears. It doesn't stop and then goes back and say, try again. No, it disappears. That's what my understanding is right now. I got to do some more research on it. So basically, it's already built in that your money will disappear if things go wrong. So the intent is that your asset, the record of your asset, the record of ownership of those assets would disappear. And guess who owns it now? They do. And now you are a tenant, and that's where they're going. They want to be the landlords of everything. You own nothing. You're happy, and you're happy to be leasing or renting or borrowing what you need, even your clothing. That is their ultimate goal. It is a service economy, and that way they control all commerce. Every transaction, they get a piece of it. That is the goal of these wackos.
And one of the things that's really important, Will, is we were talking about fractional banking, the fact that they don't need any money. They just can produce it out of nowhere. These great corporations that we don't really know who owns them, we don't know really where they are. Because it's too beyond most of us to think. They're close to the current printing press. They're getting access. Like right now, most people don't realize that the Federal Reserve has ownership of 40% of all mortgages. They own all of them anyway. And getting back to the federal depository, if the bank goes bankrupt, there's no money there. They passed all this legislation back after 2008 in every industrialized country that they'll do bail-ins. They'll just grab your stuff. legally, they passed these laws. I remember in Canada when they passed it in 2016, the year after Trudeau. It's like I'm going, oh, so great. He didn't do anything terrible to the Income Tax Act. No, in the back notes, they part of the act was something called a bail-in. And what that means is if a bank goes bankrupt and there's no money because it's unfunded. We identified in the book in the United States, the Federal Depository Insurance Corporation has $128 billion currently as this moment, or maybe that's a lie, but it has unfunded $15 trillion worth of liabilities. So what the governments did, they realized that the system's going to break back in 2008. They said, we're going to take your money. We're going to go and give you worthless paper. The company, the bank's worth nothing. And it's centralized control. And the big problem is with technology is you have more and more centralized control. And the ultimate goal is central bank digital currency, because once they get that in, the trap is shut.
Yes.
Humanity will live under the boot of these technocrats for 1,000+ years, and your children will not have the opportunity, or your grandchildren, to ask, what did you do, Grandpa, when they did this? Because they will be chipped, they will be watched, they will own nothing, and they won't know anything of happiness.
Which brings us back to, if all of this does happen, their statement of, you will own nothing and you will be happy. It was never their plan to have people give up their assets. Their plan is to steal them, to just take them. And then, when they've taken everything from you, give you some squalid little apartment to live in and just enough money to feed your children. And you'll be happy because at least your children aren't starving.
Exactly.
We're working from I'm thinking, Will, I don't want to disagree with you, but in essence, we're fat and lazy. You know, I always use the example of Hansel and Gretel. You know, it's like what does the witch do? She's a nice, friendly woman, right? Like the government, and she's trying to get them nice and fat so they could eat them, because if they were fat, they wouldn't fight back. I have no contacts. I've never been in a war zone. I don't know. We have no context. We can look at history. I could think about things that happened, the starvation. Because, Adrian, remember when we started, It Starts With Gold, when we started investigating the American Homer, and it's like we had to go and really search because it had been buried and hidden. But they never told us that close to 8 million people, and this is what they documented, died in the United States of starvation during the Great Depression. 8 million people. No one's taught that 8 million people died. We were told that maybe 1 million people are going to die of COVID.
I was put onto that thought, and she didn't even know that we were writing this book. My sister-in-law says, what about the American Holodomor? I don't see any information about it in the mainstream English press. This is something that Russians knew about, just like the Ukraine Holodomor, and they call it the American Holodomor. So that led me on to start doing research into finding out what really happened during the Great Depression.
Yeah, a Holodomor that was the massive famine that happened in Ukraine,
exactly,
back in the 1930s, when something like 7 or 8 million people starved to death. But it happened in the U.S. too. They just didn't talk about it.
They didn't talk about it. The stats were basically buried, and the articles that we were able to source started adding up the different numbers and what do you call the census rolls, and all of a sudden these numbers changed, but there was no explanation.
Can I share something where we also discovered in the United States they never talked about the Ukrainian Holodomor until 1988, when Glasnost and all that started happening, because it was believed that the United States and the Soviet Union had an agreement that they would keep both of their what happened quietly. Because you know that old saying that the victors write the history books. We all want to believe that we're like our side is the good side. We won. The history you don't know. And what we've tried to do in It Starts With Gold, and I hope we've accomplished it, and only the reader will tell us, and we feel very honored, Will, that you read the whole book, is to provide the tools, because we're just two people, together we're three, but we can have an army of sovereigns who say, I will not bend the knee. I am going to get off this system the best as I can. And it starts with community. It starts with useful tools and skills to offer that community. And it starts with gold and other precious metals and other things that are tangible, physical, meaningful, and lasting. And what we're talking about with central bank digital currency and cryptocurrency and your zeros and ones on your bank account, they're not real. A kiss from your grandchild, from your child, are real. Holding a baseball bat is real. Staring at a screen and having it tell you that you should be happy that you got $100,000 in this Bitcoin, that's not real. And someone can just flick off the switch. And you guys are in Western Canada. In 2003, in August, a breaker went out and all the power went out on the eastern seaboard and 70 million people were in the dark. Thank God it went up. That was a test of what will happen. All these people who are getting into cryptocurrency, what happens if the grid went down and it didn't come up? You have nothing to barter. And most people don't have skills to trade, nor do they have community.
Yes.
And that's what this is about. Separate you, get you onto digital, eat carbs, and then when the system goes down, you're going to line up, and the papers say that there's too many of us. And I don't know about the Georgia Guidestones, but they actually say how many of us they will have us live in perpetual harmony. 500 million people on the planet. I don't know. I just know that I'm going to do the best, and Adrian and I are going to do the best to help people prepare so they can get up and rebuild. And our children and our grandchildren will have the opportunity to ask what we did. Because it's not like in past wars, what did you do, Grandpa, when the Nazis? We're all going to be chipped. We're all going to be drugged. And those of us who are deemed useless won't be here. And you only have to study history to know what is the plan. It failed in the past, but it kept on moving forward. But now they have technology that only Hitler could dream of. And that's what this is all about.
Right. So, gentlemen, now that we have scared the hell out of the audience, let's give them hope, because there is hope.
Yeah.
I believe the globalists are going to lose. And the hope I want to give, and I want your comments on it, gentlemen, comes down to just two things. First, something that I've been saying since I was speaking at demonstrations in 2020, and it is this. Our governments have no power but what we give them. And we do not give them power when we elect them, but when we choose to obey them. So that means they can try to bring in these control systems, but if a sufficient number of people simply refuse to go along with it, simply refuse to comply, they don't have enough jackboots to force us to do it. And the second thing, bringing us right back to the subject we've been talking about these two interviews, it starts with gold. If you have tangible, physical assets that have real value, and enough of us have that, we can throw off whatever chains they want to put on us. We can kick those corrupt governments out, and we can rebuild with those assets. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Well, that's the goal that we should be striving for, and it's up to all of us to educate our fellow citizens to what's coming, educate them to prepare and build communities that are outside of the system. But we also need to figure out how to build off ramps. So you're holding your physical precious metals outside the system. How do you exchange that for a commodity or token so that you can buy goods? And so we need to build a system that is outside of their system. So part of the problem or part of the plan would have to be that we build communities and build systems that are paralleling and outside, and that I don't see happening just yet. And I'm hoping that with what you're doing with your initiative, is that we are going to be able to start working together and finding ways of holding those assets outside the system, but then using those assets as a means of exchange through technology that we are controlling.
Peter?
You need to know to be able to use the most powerful word that you have in your arsenal, and that is to say no. And once you know, and you've said no, you have a responsibility to educate other people. You do. If they choose to remain asleep, you did your job. So my whole point is, Gandhi once said, be the change you want to see in the world. And that starts with educating yourself. And then Adrian and I, we've been in the financial field for 70 years, and all we can provide is our insight in finance. And it all leads back to this corrupt financial system, because it doesn't matter if you're a farmer or you're a news reporter or you work for the government. We're all tied together through this fake currency that's about to collapse. And you need to understand it. You need to know the history, because if you want to know where we're going and you want to know where we are, you have to go back and know where we've come from. And I believe that it's really important. And Adrian and I, we're giving our book for free for 99 cents on Amazon. And the reason we're doing that is the message got to get out there. We're being censored. And we do not want that to be a barrier, because we're old. I know we want to live to 120 and every day is healthy. But you want to know something? Well, you have children. They're going to have children. We've lived our lives. And in essence, it's our job. And the reason this all happened is the adults in the room got busy and didn't pay attention to really misbehaving kids named Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, who should have never been let near the till. They were selected because they were compromised personalities. And the agenda goes forward unless you know, so you're able to exercise the most important word in the English language that exercises your right to be a sovereign, is to say no. But unless you educate yourself, and I hope that Adrian and I and Will and other people who are speaking out are part of the process to wake up, because we can't do this alone. We need you to wake up, step up, say no, educate people, get off the system, and hold people accountable who are basically sleeping through life, and they're also part of the problem.
Right.
Well, I think that change happens with a few people, and we're starting with this audience, and we can change this, because all we have to do is say, I will not bow to tyranny, and it all ends. But it can't happen with one of us. It's many of us.
Yes. And thank you, Peter, for that introduction, because once again, I'm going to give a plug for one of our initiatives here at the Iron Wire, freedomcoms.org, the Freedom Communities and Communications Network. We are building in-person freedom communities across Canada where you can contact other people in your own area, build these in-person communities where you get to know people face-to-face, first-name basis. You have their phone numbers, they have yours. If they shut down internet communications, if they shut down email, you can still gather with these people, because Peter's right. One of us stands up, they arrest us and throw us in prison. Hundreds of thousands of us stand up. There's nothing they can do about that. freedomcoms.org. It's completely free. It'll only take you a minute to sign up, and you can start connecting with other people in your area. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for these 2 interviews, for all the information you give us. Peter, I think you wanted to say something.
I want to share with you something that Adrian and I put together because it's simple, and it's called the Sovereign's Creed. And it's something that represents what we believe is the core. And can I just have a moment to
please do
share? It's a sovereign's creed. A sovereign, they have domain over themselves. So this is the creed they make them to themselves. And the lines, and I'd like us all to say it together, and hopefully we're able to say it well. To sovereignty, meaning you are responsible for you. To protecting our health. If you do not have this, what God gave us protected, and your kids, to protecting our health, to de-risking our wealth, it starts with gold. Because gold is not just a tangible, it also is a metaphor for getting off the system and to being independent. So if we can just say that together, and Will, you read our book, so I know you know the Sovereign's Creed.
I didn't memorize it.
Well, repeat after me. To sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
The sovereignty.
To protecting
our health.
To protecting our health.
To de-risking
our wealth.
To de-risking our wealth.
It starts with gold.
It starts with gold. Indeed, it does, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Once again, thank you for your efforts. Writing that book had to be a huge endeavor, and the fact that you're practically giving it away shows your commitment to helping people understand what's happening, how to protect themselves. So once again, folks, you will find links to the website and the book directly beneath this interview. I strongly recommend reading it, educating yourself on the financial system and on the steps that you can take to protect yourself, your family, and your assets.